if Earth's a sphere is a begging the question fallacy. That's the thing you're trying to prove. Don't start by assuming the very thing you're trying to prove, but everyone's focused on whether or not Jaren's a shill, like it bleeding matters. Point out the fallacy, understand the flaw in the logic, and move on with your life. Who cares if other people are too stupid to recognise the fallacy, Jaren included? Now, Jaren has had the fallacy pointed out to him. By me, he's acknowledged it. So therefore, feel free to call him a shill, but it's inconsequential. Address the argument. The argument is an assumption of a globe Earth in the first instance, stacked up in a false dichotomy against a flat Earth, also a globe projection. They want the azimuthal equidistant globe projection for some reason. Who cares? It's masking the if P then QQ therefore P, affirming the consequent. If Earth's a sphere by assumption, I'll see a 24-hour sun. 24-hour sun, therefore my globe assumption. To the sun.
No, not yet.
Okay. Like, for whatever reason, the final experiment has gained a certain degree of traction. And as that is the case with people endeavouring to call others shills based on their conclusions, there's no need. Let's just break down what actually is going on with the final experiment. The whole point of the final experiment is to mask an antipodal assumption. What does that mean? It means that for them to suggest that they're proving a ball, they must first assume they're on a ball. That's why they're going down to Antarctica, so that they can assume they're on the bottom of a ball already. So before they do anything for this endeavour, their side of this argument must assume they're already on a ball when they get there. That's called begging the question. So how do you hide this very obvious fallacy of assuming the very thing you're trying to prove? Well, you mask it in a layer of other fallacies. First being an affirming the consequent fallacy. So you mask it by not letting people realise that the thing you're trying to prove isn't the thing you're actually observing. You make it seem like something else that you're observing, not whether or not Earth's a sphere, but whether or not there's a 24-hour sun. Well, that's affirming the consequent fallacy as follows. If P, I assume my outcome of an antipodal positioning system globe Earth, then Q, I'll see a 24-hour sun. Q, I'll see a 24-hour sun. Therefore, my antipodal assumption begging the question fallacy of a globe Earth I haven't proven, I've just assumed. So if P, then Q, Q, therefore P, affirming the consequent. That's the fallacy. What happens if the general populace spots that fallacy? Well, what do you do next? You mask that fallacy in another fallacy called a false dichotomy fallacy, so that you don't notice that you're affirming the consequent and not actually observing whether or not Earth's spherical, you're observing the sun. And you're observing the sun so you can assume the Earth is spherical by begging the question. You suggest that you put a flat Earthers model up against the globe model. So nobody notices that you've got a globe model already then. So when you make your argument for the globe model, it's already in place with you on the bottom of it when you start looking at the sun. So to recap, to beg the question that you are antipodal on a sphere, you will infer that an observation of the sun will prove you're begging the question fallacy of the sphere you've assumed, and so that you don't notice that an observation of the sun, not the Earth, the assumption of the Earth being spherical, you mask it by stacking up in false dichotomy a globe Earth antipodal assumption with a flat Earth model to make it all seem fair. No, false dichotomy, affirming the consequent fallacy, begging the question fallacy. And to top it all, the begging the question of sphericity requires flat Earth measurements of the stars to create the ball to beg the question of. This whole farce starts with the systems that create these maps and models, which are flat Earth elevation angles of the stars. All that happens whenever I see any interviews with Will Duffy is he skirts the antipodal assumption in favour of highlighting the actual observation that may or may not have a phenomena to observe. And only that. So long as you don't state, if Earth's a sphere, we'll see 24 hours of sun in Antarctica. No, because then I'll be there all over it like flies on the proverbial, saying, if Earth's spheres are begging the question fallacy. That's the thing you're trying to prove. Don't start by assuming the very thing you're trying to prove. Oh, well, I'm not. I'm going down to assume the thing I prove and then look and see if there's a 24-hour sun on the thing I've assumed I'm not actually proving, I'm just assuming. Well, that seems like a antipodal assumption dressed up in an affirming the consequent. What if I stack up a false dichotomy of your model versus ours? Then no one will notice. Yeah, we have. But everyone's focused on whether or not Jaren's a shill, like it bleeding matters. Point out the fallacy, understand the flaw in the logic, and move on with your life. Who cares if other people are too stupid to recognise the fallacy, Jaren included? Now, Jaren has had the fallacy pointed out to him. By me, he's acknowledged it. So therefore, feel free to call him a shill, but it's inconsequential. Address the argument. The argument is an assumption of a globe Earth in the first instance, stacked up in a false dichotomy against a flat Earth, also a globe projection. They want the azimuthal equidistant globe projection for some reason. Who cares? It's masking the if P then QQ therefore P, affirming the consequent. If Earth's a sphere by assumption, I'll see a 24-hour sun. 24-hour sun, therefore my globe assumption.
Would you consider it a social experiment to see, which flat earthers are gullible enough to believe that looking up at the sun is going to prove anything beneath your feet?
I mean, you could do. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that, Matthias. Yes, that is you threw experiment in there to get me stuttering, didn't you, bastard? Yeah. Very well done.
That's why I said social experiment instead of science experiment.
Oh, I didn't hear that bit. I didn't hear social experiment. Yeah, it is a good word then. Yeah, perfectly appropriate too. Yes, it's in that regard. I hate the word, but yes, a social experiment, if you want to call it that, to see who's dumb enough to buy this affirming the consequent fallacy and not recognise that. What are you going to go and look at in Antarctica? The sun? Right. Hello? Is that going to prove what's on the ground? No. Now, we can measure the ground with respect to positioning of those items above the ground and verify whether or not they're above the ground at those times. That's useful. We've developed maps so we can navigate with those flat Earth angles with respect to the ground and the angles we measure off the ground. But as for I'm going to observe the sun and therefore I'm going to make an assumption that the ground I'm standing on is antipodal from where I began this journey, definitely not. How dumb people are is how quickly they recognise that antipodal assumption that's needed for this quasi-experiment. Actually fraud. It's not an experiment, it's fraud.